Good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Brophy. I am here to introduce the moderator for this session. Before that, just a little about myself. I moved to Nashua, New Hampshire for the Free State Project in 2009. I've been a candidate for state rep and alderman, participated in numerous volunteer efforts, and have attended every Liberty Forum and Port Fest held since moving to the state. If you have any questions about making a move to New Hampshire, feel free to approach me after tonight's sessions. It is now my honor to introduce Carla Gericke. Carla is an advocate for liberty, specializing in localized voluntarism, internet freedom, self-determination, and how responsible human action can lead to peace and prosperity. She is President Emeritus of the Free State Project, having served as president from 2011 to 2016, and lives in New Hampshire with thousands of fellow activists. In response to the West Side lockdown in 2016, Carla ran for Senate on a platform of reversing police militarization, legalizing marijuana and ending the war on drugs, holding government officials accountable, and embracing free markets. She lost by only 20% to a now 80-year-old 10-term incumbent Democrat. Carla is writing her first book about her pursuit of a principled, purpose-driven life in the free state of New Hampshire, and is once again running for state senate as Republican in District 20. If you'd like to support her efforts, find her to donate your time or treasure. She's right here. You can learn more at carla4nhsenate.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Carla Gericke.
Hi guys, thank you so much. We're not actually, that was a great introduction. I'm 100% sober. Introduction. I am not going to take up any time. I'm just going to let the speakers go. This is kind of like TED Talks, very fast, 20 minutes, different subjects. Our first speaker is Drew Klein. He is the interim head honcho person, as you can tell I prepared, of the Josiah Bartlett Center. The Josiah Bartlett Center is the oldest free market think tank in New Hampshire. I've known Drew since his days as a union leader, where he actually gave us a not horrible article once in the Union Leader with both the words Free Staters and awesome in the title, which makes him awesome, so please a warm round of applause for Drew Klein.
Hey, thanks. I'm Drew Klein. I am president of the Josiah Bartlett Center. We are New Hampshire's free market think tank. If anybody else tells you differently, they're lying. So the Bartlett Center, for those of you who don't know, goes back to the 1990s. And if you're familiar with Washington and the Cato Institute, we're pretty much like the New Hampshire version of Cato. And we do not take on social issues. We do not take on military issues. We don't take on much from the federal government unless it has an absolute direct impact on New Hampshire. We are focused on New Hampshire. We are free market. And the reason I'm here today is to talk to you about what that means. So I used to be at the Union Leader. I was editorial page of the Union, editor of the Union Leader for a long time. And I predate the Free State Project for by about 5 or 6 years. So I'm old New Hampshire compared to a lot of you. And so I got the opportunity to run the Josiah Bartlett Center last year, and it's been a fantastic time. One of the great joys of my life is getting to work for an organization that leaves me alone and lets me write and talk about issues from a purely ideological point of view, without interfering with little notes and nudges. I get no direction from my board of directors. They just let me off the leash, and it's fantastic. So one of the joys of that is that I don't have people tugging at each ear, right? You know, well, you gotta say this. And it got me to thinking a lot in the last year, right? So if you're on the center right, broadly speaking, the last couple of years, I think, have been trying times and trying to figure out who we are and what we stand for as a broad movement. You may know individually, but trying to figure out where you fit in and what your kind of role is in this big picture movement has been challenging in the last couple of years. And it got me thinking a lot about something that the former editor of National Review wrote back in 1989, and that's what I'm going to talk about today, which is it's become known in sort of National Review circles and right right-wing circles, so to speak, as O'Sullivan's Law. So John O'Sullivan was the editor of National Review in the 80s. And he wrote this little piece, and it was kind of a throwaway piece, but it stuck because he was writing about, there's this previous law that says, it's a law of oligarchies, basically. And the law of oligarchies is, the first law of oligarchies is that the permanent managers, the permanent ruling class of an oligarchy will eventually come to turn the organization to their own personal interests, away from whatever its stated goals and interests are. And O'Sullivan wrote that, he would take that a step further. And he said the first O'Sullivan law is any organization that is not expressly right-wing will over time become left-wing. And that was a profound sort of statement. I don't know that he meant it as this deep, profound thing. He was kind of just throwing off this piece, but it stuck, and people refer to it a lot. And it stuck with me because you can look back in history, in U.S. history in particular, right? And you can see this happen over time to everything. So if you think of the great organizations that the so-called robber barons created, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, all these institutions that were created to advance either, sometimes they created advanced arts, but often like the Ford Foundation, Henry Ford was very conservative. The Ford Foundation is very left-wing. These things it creeps, and I'm trying to figure out why that is. And one of the reasons, there are lots of reasons why you can sort of think why that would happen. And I've come up with a couple that I want to talk about. And they all go back to O'Sullivan's law. So you have, I think if you could take out the big, giant endowed funds, so the Ford Foundation, a lot of art museums, a lot of major corporate foundations, they make the capital mistake of creating an endowment that will permanently fund their organization, which is a massive no-no. Why would that be? Why wouldn't you want to just do it in perpetuity? Henry Ford put his money in and he set all these guidelines. It should do these things, it should be for this. And what happens is the oligarchs take over. And eventually they turn the organization towards their own interests. So if you have a foundation that is in New York or it's in any sort of cultural center, it just absorbs the vibe from the culture. It absorbs the norms from the culture. And so they don't have to compete. If you have an endowment, there's no competition. You don't have to compete for donors. You don't have to compete for customers. You don't have to do anything but spend mommy and daddy's money. That's all you do. So why would you have any other interest than your own self-interest? So these sort of permanent endowments are a major problem. But this happens in organizations that are not permanently endowed either. And part of the reason is that humans are instinctively tribal. So I think there's this massive divide among people who I would categorize as in the liberty movement. I think everybody here would kind of agree with that. And people who are not. Whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left, if you're not in the liberty movement, if you're not somebody who is ideologically committed, who's thought through, these are the things I believe in individual freedom. I believe in free markets. I believe in the rule of law. And I want these rules to apply evenly to everyone. If you stop and think about that for a minute historically, that's bizarre. We are a bunch of weirdos. I'm serious. It's crazy. Humans are tribal. We're animalistic. We are the one movement in all of politics that is explicitly non-tribal. If you're on the right, we get quibble about terminology. I'm going to paint with a huge broad brush here, right? So if you are on the pre-modern right, pre-enlightenment right, so you think that, again, big brush, right? Tribal, tradition, culture, those are your main drivers, right? You don't really care so much about free markets. It's nice, but that's not your main thing. You're a cultural warrior. If you're on the postmodern left, everything is about the oppressed and the oppressors. That's how you see the world, right? There's no other divide. So that's why we can't even talk to each other, because the postmodern left sees literally everything as divided into oppressor and oppressed. And they always side with the oppressor, and nothing else matters. And that's explicitly tribal. So we have in the past, we have tribalism. In the future, the postmodernists, we have tribalism. We're stuck in this weird middle where we believe in what there's lots of different terms for it. You can call it classical liberalism, I like to call it enlightenment, those are liberalism. Where we believe that rationality, free thinking, scientific method, examination, right, all these things, and we don't necessarily think tribally. That is a weird place to be in politics. And for that reason, if you're thinking politically, the free market organizations, the organizations that are devoted to liberty, that are devoted to those Enlightenment ideals, they are rare and unique, and you have to cherish them, and you have to keep them, and you have to fight for them, and you have to fund them, because everything else becomes tribal. You cannot put your trust in an organization. This is my own personal belief. I'm just going to share this with you. If you put your trust in an organization that is not explicitly pro-liberty, you're going to be disappointed, because that organization will then become captured by tribalism. Both political parties fall into this category. Right? Both of the major parties and lots of other parties fall into this category. We've seen this, they flip ideologically. You go back to the late 19th century, and you had what was a Republican and Democrat back then, and then you jump forward to the 30s, and then you jump forward to the 60s, and you jump forward to today, they're all over the place. There's no ideological consistency, because it's tribal. If you want to promote liberty and promote freedom, you have to support organizations that are expressly dedicated to liberty. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed. Now with that, I would add a couple of caveats. So the nonprofit sector in the United States, I think most people don't realize, is massive. Right? The nonprofit sector in the United States spends something like $1 trillion a year. It's huge. There are nonprofits everywhere. I think you can fight back against this sort of leftist creep, the O'Sullivan's Law creep in nonprofits, in a couple of ways. One is you establish, fund, and support organizations that are absolutely dedicated to liberty, that have bylaws that say that have missions that are expressly dedicated to liberty, and that's one way to fight back about it. But you can also, and I would encourage you, as people who I assume here most people would consider themselves on the libertarian side, I would encourage you to get involved non-politically. I would encourage you to get involved in your community. Get out of the library. Right? Every town library has a board of trustees or a board of directors. Right? Get on, find a local nonprofit that is something that doesn't have to be political. You can get on these organizations. You get a couple of people who are market-minded, who are liberty-minded, to be a bit of a check on these organizations. So as an example of this sort of weird creep, there's a big umbrella organization of nonprofits in the United States. I'm going to blank on its name right now. I hugged Carla before I came up here, and I think I got the right thing. So, but it's an organization that's explicitly, it's a nationwide organization. Its mission is to promote nonprofits and to be sort of this clearinghouse for sharing ideas and for advancing nonprofits of all kinds. They don't have an agenda politically. I got on the website just in preparation for this talk. Let's look at the numbers for nonprofits. Their news section for the last 8 months has been attacking the Republican tax plan. It's just nonstop attack Republicans. This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that exists to help all nonprofits. And I run a nonprofit, I actually run 2 nonprofits. And I'm on there reading these press releases that say, nonprofits oppose the tax bill. What? So it's just this creep, this institutional creep, right? So cherish, fund, support organizations that are devoted to liberty, but also, if you have time, there's nothing wrong with volunteering for some of these organizations that are supposed to be nonpartisan, that are supposed to be down the middle, and you can maybe serve as a little check. Don't fall into the trap that they do, right? Don't take over the organization and try to make it a libertarian activist organization. But be a little bit of a check, there's nothing wrong with getting involved in your community in that way, and maybe preventing that creep a little bit. So that is really about it. I'm gonna have a short talk today, but I do have, and I have a question here, but before I get to that, on the table over there, and I'd like to ask if maybe somebody can pass this around. So at the Bartlett Center, for those of you who don't know, we are a free market organization, and one of the things that we focus on state policy, so we write a lot about state politics and policy, mostly policy. And one of my missions since I took over was to sort of rethink the way think tanks communicate with people, because think tanks tend to be dry and boring and focused on policy, and that doesn't really attract a lot of hip, cool people. And so I realized that we have, in New Hampshire, we have a constituency that is the legislators. We want to influence them. So we put out papers, we put out policy analyses, we talk to legislators. We talk to sort of the ruling class in New Hampshire. But we also want to talk to everybody else. So we started a newsletter that comes out weekly every Friday, and it's lighthearted, it's funny. If you've ever read Jonah Goldberg's Goldberg File, I didn't explicitly think of that when I created it, but people have made a lot of comparisons. We tell a lot of jokes. So we try to be funny and sort of get people to think about politics or policy in a different way, because one of the things that I found in doing this, and I think a lot of you probably know this firsthand, if you were talking to somebody, and I did this at Dartmouth College recently, I came up to speak to some people, some students, and as soon as they found out I was free market, that's all they wanted to talk about was free market. What does that mean, and how do you talk about it? And I realized after about half an hour of talking to some of these kids, and they were very bright, they didn't know what free market meant. They had no idea. We were speaking different language. Every time I said free market, they heard put rich, powerful corporations in charge of government. And actually, it's like the fifth time this girl said, well, how do you keep the powerful corporations from controlling? Because you don't let them in the door. You keep them outside, and the government's here, and they're out there, and you don't give them any special breaks, and you don't. She just had no idea what it was talking about. And so this newsletter is a way to engage people in a lighthearted way that maybe talks to them in terms that they can kind of grasp, with a lot of cultural references, we make a lot of jokes, and so hopefully we can penetrate those defenses a little bit. So instead of getting a lecture on free market economics, they're getting a bunch of jokes and making fun of non-free market economics, and maybe they can kind of figure out together. So with that, if you want to sign up for a newsletter, there's a sign-up sheet going around. I highly recommend it. It's voluntary. If you sign up and you don't like it, there's an unsubscribe. We don't stalk you or chase you. You're out, and we think you're losers, but you're gone. So on that, I'll end it. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Oh, yes.
I've heard this thesis expressed several times. So what about just exposing these organizations that they're not following their original mission, or they're getting explicitly political, that they shouldn't be?
And that should always be done. The problem is, it is being done on a daily basis. So you've got Capital Research Center, you've got the Media Research Center, you have a lot of organizations in DC that are conservative that write tons of papers, and they expose these organizations for not following their mission, and nobody cares. They just view it as right-wing cranks complaining about, liberal conspiracies. Like every time you mention George Soros, people turn their ears off. They just stop. So they don't. It should be done, but it's not really that effective because these are mostly nonprofits, right? So people don't care. They may care if they are donating money to them, but a lot of these groups have endowments, so they don't necessarily. They're not necessarily accountable, like I said. So I think you should, but I think it's much more effective to compete, right? Rather than attacking and pointing fingers, just compete. You're your own organization. And then, one of the things that I like to do is point out that we are truly independent. We are truly nonpartisan. We have, in the last couple of years, in the last few months, we've criticized a couple of Governor Sununu's ideas and written policy papers, slamming them. People think that we are, Republican wing, but we're not. And because we're not tribal, you have to show, if you're going to be truly liberty-minded, truly independent, truly free market, you gotta live it every day. As soon as you become co-opted, as soon as you start to become a wing of one party or another, you're dead. You're done. Your credibility is gone. Even if your money doesn't dry up, which it should, your credibility is gone. So you got to be credible. You got to be consistent, and that makes you effective. You know, I get invited all the time to talk to reporters. I get quoted in the paper. It drives me crazy when Republicans complain about the liberal media and they refuse to talk to the liberal media. Talk to them. Say things, short, concise sentences. Say exactly what you mean. Don't babble. Don't run on at the mouth like I'm doing right now. And they will quote you accurately. And if you just have an honest relationship with them, they will get to know that you're trustworthy and you'll get accurately quoted. All right. So that's it for me. No other questions? I'm out. Sign up for my newsletter.
Sign up for the newsletter.
Do sign up for the newsletter. Carla's a fan.
We gotta, yeah.
All right. I'll talk to you personally. How's that? All right. Thanks.
Sorry, because we're on a really tight schedule for these, and I want to keep it on point and on time. Next up, we are going to have Michelle Lavelle, who does a lot of school choice and homeschooling activism and writing and blogging and organizational stuff, and I will let her talk more. I'll give you a 5-minute warning. These are actually not going to be Q&A, so I'm just going to suggest if you do have questions, write them down, find us afterwards. Right after this, at 6 o'clock, we have State of the Free State, and then at 6:30, we're free, so feel free to come talk to us then. Thank you.
Hi there. So my name is Michelle Lavelle. Yes, my name does rhyme. So makes it easy to remember, right? Thank you for coming here. So what I want to talk to you about is how do you level up on your activism? So the 3 groups that you see here, Granite State Home Educators, School Choice for New Hampshire, and the Women's Defense League, that wasn't here when I moved almost 13 years ago. I either created it, I plugged in, or I helped make it happen, and you can too. Can I do something wrong? Oh, there you go. Great. Now, yes, I need my glasses to actually read this. So, my broadest, most involved section of activism is with education. It started off with homeschooling, and, well, yeah, it snowballed from there. So I love this quote. There isn't a right way to become educated. There are as many ways as there are fingerprints, from who else but John Taylor Gatto. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. So yes, I do school choice activism, and with that, that means whatever fits the child. They've got one shot at their K-12 education, and whatever that looks like, whether it is the public schools, or a public charter school, or a private school, or home ed, and maybe they can take advantage of the tax credit scholarship, and maybe we can get this ESA launched and really help those kids get to the right educational fit. There's so many exciting things going on there. So my activism started here as a homeschooler. When I moved here in 2005, I had 0 political interest. I figured, okay, I show up at the voting booth, I do my civic duty, and I'm done, I'm good, right? That's all I needed to do. Boy, did things change. And for me, there were catalyst moments. Things that really, yes, they triggered me. They got me involved. And for me, with homeschooling, some of you who may have been here back then in 2008 and 9 may remember the really, really horrible homeschool bills they tried to put in. It would have made New Hampshire the worst state to home educate your kids. And boy, oh boy, I had a learning curve. Because it wasn't just things that happened at the State House, there were things going on at the State Board of Education. So yeah, Drew has seen me out there from time to time, which is great. But there's a lot of ways to be watching this, and it's not just in the State House. But that's where it started. And I can tell you a story of how I got started. I want to thank former Representative Emma Rouse, who was just recently replaced on the State Board of Ed. She's the reason I'm here. She was the one who tried to get those awful things in place behind the legislative process. And so, yes, she's why I'm here. So that was my trigger. Next. I know you don't usually think of guns and education going together, but for me they do. I usually try to keep those very distinct. This is a rare presentation where I talk about both at the same time. But yeah, I shoot guns. And I help people learn how to shoot guns. And I do it a lot. So before I got here, there was a group in place called the Second Amendment Sisters. And I plugged into them. Bunch of really awesome ladies go shooting. Wow, what a novelty coming from Illinois, right? What a thrill. That's how it started. But then again, I had a trigger moment where something happened at home where it threatened our family. My life changed that day. So now, Second Amendment Sisters was here, things grew, just kind of organically happened. There were some challenges with SAS back in 2014, and we ended up, within a few months, developing the Women's Defense League of New Hampshire. We have probably a unique organization when you look at it nationally. We are a women's organization. We are there's only 2 gun groups in this state that do not have DC organizations behind them. It's us and Pro Gun. We are the only one that does both the legislative work and the training. We educate over 200 women a year on how to shoot. There's nothing more thrilling than seeing some woman come in who's nervous, maybe never held a gun before, and she walks out with this big smile. And it's empowering, and we're changing people's lives every time. So, pretty awesome. This has triggered me this last week. How many of you have been noticing Senate Bill 353? They want to limit the distribution of wine into our state. Hello, I'm sorry, you want to crack my lifestyle? That triggered me. So yeah, they got my radar now, and I'm doing something about it. Now, no, that's not one of my main activism issues, but it sure has my attention now. So no, you're not going to take away my wine.
Out of your cold dead head.
Out of my cold dead head. So, how do you plug in? First, find your liberty passion. For me, it was education. Started with education, my own children. Started there and got bigger and bigger. Started with guns. Boy, I didn't expect that one. But it sure grew from there. And of course, wine. Don't mess with my wine. But what's your passion? Is it election law? Is it real estate? Is it, I don't know. What is it? Find it, plug in, or create it. Those, back to the first slide, the groups that I'm in, they weren't here when I moved. But boy, we're here now. Granite State Home Educators is a statewide homeschool support group that I launched with some friends in November of 2016. It's less than a year and a half old. But we have almost 1,200 people following us in our Facebook group. Extremely engaged. Go there any day and you'll see like 10 different topics with people talking. And these are people who are waking up to their own educational freedom issues. If they aren't there already, they're sure getting an earful now. So, plug in or create it. If you're an in-system activist, NHLA is the best way to plug in. It is a unique animal in New Hampshire. Boy, nothing else like it exists. And you can get involved in the bill review, whether you're actually in state already or not. Get involved, find your liberty passion, become an expert. Get to know those issues, add your expertise to those bill reviews. From that, the gold standard. So before every House or Senate vote, they put together those lovely gold sheets that you've seen that NHLA distribute. That's what they're graded on. We hold them accountable. Be a part of that process. Trust me, every week, that's a big process. The guys at NHLA do an amazing job putting that together. Hats off to them. The ratings, holding them accountable, contribute to their PAC. So we get good people up there to do the right thing. Because you still need somebody to push that red or green button. Okay? For as much as noise as I may make, I don't get to push that button. I try to influence them, but we need good people in those seats to make it happen. So see Marav, if you have an interest for running. So where can you grow it from there? So committees, get involved at the committee level. That's where the action is, I'm telling you. That's where we have an influence. That's where you can have the biggest bang for your buck. Get involved, know the committee members. Become a groupie. I'm up there as often as some of those House Education Committee members, sometimes more. They offered me a locker so I could be up there with them. But get to know them. They're people. Testimony, testify on those bills. Become a subject matter expert. I started in homeschooling, now look what I'm talking about all the time. Sometimes homeschooling, but not always. It's other education policy issues. Follow the bill. It goes through all this sausage-making process, it changes, it's amended. What are they even talking about? Can you help influence what that amendment looks like? Sure you can. Become a subject matter expert. Have those legislators know you, trust you. Become their go-to person. That takes commitment. That doesn't happen in 1 or 2 sessions. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. But yes, you can develop that kind of relationship with legislators where they know if they've got a question, they come to you. It's powerful. That's where you can really make it happen. Grassroots, boy, help people get involved. Help them plug in. Be the resource that helps bring them to that way to find what they do if all they have is 5 minutes. So make it happen, make it easy for them to get involved. So how do we achieve liberty in our lifetime? I don't know what that next step is, do you? Does that mean having liberty-minded people in the House and the Senate and the corner office all the time? Maybe. Is there, or maybe that top of the pyramid is the next step. If we had somebody on every committee, can we make it happen without, I don't know. How do we get there? This is where the organic nature of liberty can really be powerful. I don't know how we'll get there, but we will. And I'm seeing it change over the course of the time that I've been here. Finally, this is where you can find me. I half live on Facebook. Those of you who know me know you can find me there almost 20 hours a day. That's my email, my website, QR code. I'm doing a school choice talk tonight at the 1,000 Cranes, which is a few blocks up the street. Find me there. Jody Underwood will be there. We can talk about the Croydon experience. Lots of good things. We can talk about the ESA, but I'll be there tonight. Come talk to me. I'll also be at the Women's Defense League table. Yeah, for the gunnies. I'll be there. We can talk. We'll have a conversation. Thank you.
Going to go here. Our next speaker, and it's my privilege to introduce, is Ian Underwood. Ian, I like to call the evil Buddha. I don't know, he's just a really interesting dude. He is affiliated with the Bardo Project and Bardo Farm. He's a half of Jody. I don't know which one's the better one. They're both pretty swell. And he's going to be talking, when we were coming up with the topic, he said, just shoot me some questions. Maybe that'll trigger, wow, it triggers our subject today. Maybe that'll trigger something. And I have been thinking a lot about sort of this culture of fear that we live in, and that we have to be afraid of everything. And I think it's a way they, sort of mind control us. So I heard parts of the speech already, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. Thank you, Ian Underwood.
So she's already introduced the topic, and thanks for the question. So one of my favorite quotes, I'm not a tattoo guy, but if I was going to get a tattoo, this might be it. It's from Jack Canfield, and he said, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And what he meant was, if there's something, a thing you want, or a thing you want to get rid of, a relationship you want to be in, or one you want to get out of, something you want to happen or to stop happening, if you're not doing it, if it's not happening, it's because you're afraid of something. And maybe you're afraid of failure. Maybe you're afraid of success. Maybe you're just afraid of change. It could be anything. But I think this has a second meaning for libertarians, right? Because what do we want? We want liberty. That's why we're at Liberty Forum. And liberty is on the other side of fear, but not our fear, other people's fear. The fear of people who are afraid that if they let you medicate yourself, or if they let you educate your own kids, or they let you defend yourself, or do any of 1,000 other things, that some horrible, horrible thing is going to happen. So Carla's term was the culture of fear, and I always, instead of the culture of fear, I always thought of something that I called the cult of the expert, and that was sort of how I understood this. And that cult is, for me, this insidious idea, which has become just part of everything, that only experts should be allowed to fill in the blank. Only experts should be allowed to write prescriptions. Only experts should be allowed to argue in court. Only experts should be allowed to teach kids to read. But the culture of fear is kind of a nice metaphor, because to culture something, you need to feed it. It needs a medium in which it can grow. And the medium for fear is ignorance. Now this culturing, I believe, is intentional, right? It's done by media, politicians, businesses. And that's because if you can make somebody afraid, then you can sell them security, or the promise of security, or something that feels like security. So the media are selling fear because if they can make you afraid, then your eyes will be glued to a screen or a piece of paper and they can stick an ad in front of it. So they profit directly from your fear. Right? Businesses, if they can make you afraid that your identity will be stolen, your kids will be stolen, you'll smell bad on the bus, whatever it is they can make you afraid of, they can sell you something to fix that. Politicians, it's a little more subtle, and they're the ones I'm more concerned with. If they can make you afraid of something, what you will give them is not money, it's monopolies. Okay? You will give them control over some area of your life. But the thing is, a monopoly isn't something that the state can legitimately create or enforce, right? This is my favorite part of the New Hampshire Constitution. Honestly, I would just get rid of the rest of it and start from here. But the idea is that you can only delegate a power that you have it, and so the way I always understand it is if you couldn't hire somebody to do something, you can't elect them to do it either, okay? And nobody in this room or anywhere else has the power to create a monopoly. And so that power can't be delegated to government. So, what's interesting is if you skip ahead in the Constitution, Part 2, Article 8 and 3, you find out that not only is the government not supposed to be creating or enforcing monopolies, they're supposed to be protecting us from them. That's what they're there for. And you'll notice the important word of all monopolies, not just private monopolies. That would include state monopolies. And so we're in another one of these situations where everything's been turned on their head. You create a structure to protect you from something, and it ends up actually creating the thing that you wanted to be protected from. So this idea that delegating a power creates a monopoly has to go away. So if a bunch of us get together and go, we'd like to protect our property, we could hire somebody, a government or private organization, say, you can protect our property, but it doesn't mean we can't, and it doesn't mean other people can't do it. So that really needs to go away. Why? Because without monopolies, you have no licenses. Licenses basically are certificates at that point. And why does that matter? Well, because licensing encourages, it almost demands a particular way of thinking about expertise, which is that there are people way up here who are experts, and they can do things. There's everybody else way down here, and they can't do anything, okay? And only the experts can get licenses. And of course, along with licensing comes exams and requirements, because if they can keep the group up there, the group of people who are licensed small enough, then they can keep their prices up and they can control everybody. So we need a better way of thinking about expertise, right? One, expertise is scalable, okay? Not everybody knows. It's not that people know everything or they don't know anything. It's that everybody knows a little bit. I know more than that guy and I know less than that guy. And so we're on a continuum of this. And the second thing about expertise is lots of things don't require the level of expertise it takes to get a license. So I don't need, say, a licensed electrician if I just want to rewire a socket or have my friend rewire a socket. But this raises a question. How can we know that somebody can be trusted, okay, if we don't have this? Well, in Israel, they have this great thing called the hechshers, where people are very interested in whether their food is kosher enough at restaurants. And so rabbis go around and inspect everything. And if you pass their inspection, they slap a sticker on your window, and people walking down the street can go, oh, I trust that rabbi, I can go in there. We actually have these things here. You know, we have underwriter laboratories, we have consumer reports, good housekeeping seals, so they actually go out and evaluate products and tell us, yeah, these are safe, these suck, these are pretty good. We have, you know, professional groups that can do the same thing. They could tell you how good somebody is and whether they're registered with them, you know, in case you're afraid that you might get a bad interior designer, for example, which could just, you know, be awful. So the thing about this is changing this system of licensing has to be gradual. You can't just go in and start saying, get rid of all this, because here's the thing. One of the things that people have learned to be afraid of is change. Fortunately, our legislature, I'm pretty sure without really understanding what they were doing, has pointed the way forward. And that is, you can treat licenses as if they were certificates, which is to say, you leave everything in place, all the tests, all the money you have to pay, all the hoops you have to jump through, they just make them optional. Okay, you can get an electrician's license, but if you don't have one, it doesn't prevent you from doing anything. And I know, this sounds nuts, doesn't it? Like, there's no way that can happen. Except, we have the pistol and revolver license, which is a license that is optional. And so New Hampshire law already has an example of a license, which is called a license, that's their word, that's optional. And I see this as the thin edge of a very, very large wedge that we should be hammering on. So if you want to get me elected, that's the kind of thing I'd be working on. But this change can't just be legislative, okay? Because you can't legislate people out of fear any more than you can bomb them into freedom, right? So, when people think about farmers, they think, what's a farmer's job? And the farmer's job is you plant the seed, you take care of it, you harvest the fruit, that's it. That's the short-term job. The long-term job is you have to improve the soil every year. And Neil is a master at this. You're bringing in animal waste and stuff that's left over, and every year the soil gets better. The plants, the seeds take root better, the plants are stronger, they grow bigger, everything's better. Some of the pests find it harder to live there, right? And that's the real product. That's the one you pass on to the next generation and the next. And the reason I bring that up is, not everybody wants to get involved in politics. Some people just want to live their lives, right? They don't want to be going out and doing all this stuff. And here's the thing. Even non-activists can provide an essential component of this, improving the soil so that when legislative seeds finally get sown, they'll actually take root and grow. So one of the major obstacles to this is identified by Michael Pollan in this great book, In Defense of Food. If you haven't read it, take a look. And he calls this thing nutritionism, and it's a 4-point program to just essentially take something away from people. The first is you make your subject, in his case, eating, seem like something separate from the rest of life, right? And then you isolate particular components. Well, there's proteins, and there's fats, and there's these vitamins, and there's this kind of fiber. And then you assert that if you assemble those components, you have nutrition. And of course, you're missing all kinds of stuff. They make things seem more complicated than they are by using a lot of specialized vocabulary like insulin sensitivity. So people basically start feeling like, this is too complicated for me, I need to turn this over to experts, and then you license the experts. And then you've got it captured. And before you know it, people can't even figure out how to feed themselves, okay? And similar processes are applied all over the place. In one case, educationism, I would call it, right? Where you say, well, look, if you follow this curriculum and you learn these things, you're educated and you've missed almost everything. So educationism, I think, is a more accurate name for schooling. And this kind of expertism is becoming more prevalent, and it is screwing up everything. And it screws up everything because it leads you to take this view of life where you put your head down, you do your job, you make some money, and you pay experts to do everything for you. Because you don't think you can do it for yourself. Or even if you wanted to, it might get illegal. So there was a name created by the famous psychologist Martin Seligman. He called this learned helplessness. And for the antidote to this, we have to turn to another famous psychologist, Tyler Durden, who said, what we have to do is remind these guys of the power that they still have. And that's really what Fight Club was about. And the great part about Fight Club was, to get somebody into Fight Club, what you did was you went out, you started a fight, and you lost. Because then the other guy wins a fight, and he feels like, this is something I really need to do. But, just like not everybody wants to get involved in politics, not everybody wants to get hit in the face. Fortunately, there is another way to go about this. You go out, you find somebody who doesn't think he can do something. I don't even care what it is. And you help him learn to do it. You get him to pick a fight with that thing and win. Same shit, fewer bruises. And I call this just DIY. Okay? So the reason that I love DIY is it undermines the cult of excellence by eroding this idea of specialization, right? So everybody's seen this quote from Robert Heinlein. It's a list of things where basically people look at that list and they think, no, only experts can do that stuff. You have to have a license to do this. And his point is anybody should be able to do all of them, right? So that's a great first step, but wait, there's more. DIY makes it harder to lie to people, okay? So if there's anything you know about, say in your job, like for me for a long time it was the space program, and you would see a news report and you think they're getting it all wrong. And at a certain point you start thinking, well, I'm sure they got everything else right. But after a while you start, as you learn more and more things and you see more and more mistakes, your attitude changes and it becomes, well, if they're getting this wrong, what else are they getting wrong? And that is the beginning of the end for widespread manipulation by the media, okay? DIY makes it harder to sell you solutions to problems that don't exist. So, for instance, now that I've been involved in food production for a while, it's natural for me to ask myself questions like, do I really need the government to protect me from raw milk? I don't think I do. We are surrounded by people who want to cover the world in leather because they've forgotten that they can just wear shoes, okay? So if you understand more, you fear less. If you fear less, it's harder to sell you false security. And if politicians can't sell you false security, what else do they have? So DIY gives you more control over your life. When you need to do something, you do it. When something breaks, you fix it. And this gives you practice at evaluating risks. You find yourself asking, well, what could go wrong if I do this? And what will I do about that, okay? So Bruce Lee said once, you shouldn't pray for an easy life, you should pray for the strength to deal with a difficult life. And somebody in the habit of thinking that way becomes awfully hard to scare, okay? Having said that, there are things I wouldn't do, like I'm not going to rewire my battery bank and burn my house down. I'm going to go get Bill Domenico to do that. Do I care if he has a license? I don't care if he has a license because I know he knows what he's doing, and if he doesn't know what he's doing, he won't do it. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm against fear, right? The right amount of fear can help keep you alive or solvent. But too much fear can keep you from living, and that's the problem. So then there's the rush, okay, which Michelle mentioned. So I had a formative experience when I was, I guess, in college. Somebody bought me a juggling book, Klutz juggling book. And until that time, I thought that there was a juggling gene that you had to be born with. And so I had this experience where on Monday I couldn't juggle, and by Wednesday I could, and it blew my mind. And from then on, I've always wondered, why is this not part of it? If you're going to have a curriculum, why are you not teaching kids to have this experience where you see that I am a different person than I was a few days ago? Okay? That never happens. And here's the thing, as Michelle is pointing out, seeing that happen to somebody else is awesome. You take somebody who didn't think that they could kill a chicken, and the next thing you know, they've done the whole thing. Carla can attest to this, right? You just think, that is not a thing I can do, and then a couple hours later, you're like, I was wrong. What else am I wrong about? Okay, and that's one of the reasons we have harder workshops. There's a bonus. It starves the beast. If you can do things, if you can make things, if you can fix things, then you can trade with people. I'll do this for you, you do this for me. Okay? There's no money, there's no taxes, there's no income involved. And to paraphrase Mark Minsky, one of my heroes, the hardest transactions to trace are the ones that are never recorded. Good news is, you can do this job from home. You don't have to go to Concord or Washington. You don't have to hold signs in the rain. You don't have to stand outside a voting booth. You don't have to run for office. You don't have to donate money to campaigns. Those are all great things to do, by the way. But you don't have to be the one out harvesting and planting the crops. You can be the one helping to ready the soil so that the soil will reject the weeds of fear and nurture the seeds of liberty. So I have a favorite model of expertise, which comes from a book called Mount Analog. And in this thing, there's a bunch of people moving up this mountain from stage to stage. And your responsibility as you go up is before you get to go to the next level, you have to turn around and find somebody who needs to get to your level and help them. Okay? And I love this because it points out that you don't have to be at the top of the mountain before you can help people, right? I can teach people math, I can teach about science, I can teach you about kung fu, I can teach you how to cut down a tree, I can teach you how to, harvest a chicken, debone a pig. I'm not the best at any of those things. I'm not even the best at bardo at some of those things. But here's the thing, I can show you what I know, even as I continue to learn more, right? And so really, just to sum up, if you want to make it harder for fear to keep growing, learn something, teach something, remind people of the power that we all still have. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. You've taught me a lot in life, so I appreciate that sentiment. Our next speaker, and then I'll be our final speaker today, is David Sad. I met him recently when I decided to get involved a little bit with Right to Know, New Hampshire. I had been noticing that they were just doing really great work. I get excited whenever I see something that seems pro-liberty happening and I have no idea who the people are who are doing it. So I reached out and got to meet David. And so he'll be talking a little bit about Right to Know and how we can help. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is David Sad. I'm going to be talking today about my personal experience in government overreach and the result of that in my journey into advocacy for a more open and transparent government. So there's two main things I'm going to be covering today. One is my personal story, and then how I took that and channeled my energies to be focus on open and transparent government. I moved to Rumney about 6 years ago from Massachusetts. I'm self-employed. I have my own IT consulting practice. I'm a member of the Rumney Planning Board, so I got involved in politics. And I'm president of Right to Know New Hampshire, and I'll be talking more about that in a moment. I have a couple of questions for you just to understand where you're coming from. Just by a show of hands, who has already made the move to New Hampshire and is a New Hampshire resident? Okay, good. Who plans to move to New Hampshire within the next few years? Good. And out of all of you, who's familiar with the Right to Know law in New Hampshire? Okay, good. Some of you are. So some of you will get a little bit of a refresher. Okay, my story. I live in Rumney. I own property. It just happens to be located directly behind the local elementary school. And so I have a right-of-way across school property. And as you can tell by this picture, during our infamous mud season here, I'm not able to make it to my house. Neither are emergency vehicles, propane delivery, and I got tired of using my ATV to transfer groceries to my house. So I went to the school board and I said, I have a legal right-of-way to my house, but it happens to cross your playing field behind the school, and I would like to improve that right-of-way, which I have a legal right to do. And I'm here as a courtesy to let you know that I'm planning on doing that, and can we work things out so that all parties are happy. I'm not going to get into a lot of details, I have a blog that I put together that's rumdnh.wordpress.com, and you can go there and learn the whole story. But needless to say, it resulted in government overreach, and it took them a year to simply respond to my request to improve my right-of-way. And then when they responded to me, they put together a whole list of demands which were the epitome of government overreach. They wanted to limit the width of my right-of-way. They wanted me to put in the road, but then I would have to have sole responsibility on its maintenance, even though being public property, the public could access it and could use it and abuse it. They wanted me to agree that I would not be able to do any future development with my property, so they were going to essentially take away some of my property rights. And they wanted me to move my right-of-way away from the playing field, because as you can see from this picture, my driveway literally abuts the soccer playing field. So they were concerned about the kids maybe getting run over. So I did not agree to those terms, and so we got into a legal battle. The school filed an injunction against me to keep me from improving my right-of-way. So now this year battle is turning into a multi-year battle. Attempts at mediating that dispute were unsuccessful. What made matters worse is the school board officials made false claims in the injunction they filed with court. They made false allegations to the planning board and then sicked the planning board on me. They violated the right to know law by hiding this dispute from public view. They summoned police to an open public meeting to have myself removed from that open public meeting. And of course, then they go and denigrate me in the public square, because public officials have a much larger megaphone than the average local citizen. One of the members of the board stole my personal property. I had to call the police. I got a police report that documents the fact that he stole my property because he had to return it. And then they spent over $41,000 of taxpayer money to fight my ability to improve my right-of-way. In the end, we went to court. The court rules that I could proceed with improving my right-of-way. There's a lot more to the story, but I've got 20 minutes and I can't tell you any more. But needless to say, it was a tremendous amount of government overreach. So going through this whole ordeal, which lasted several years and cost me many thousands of dollars in my own legal expenses, you go through the 5 stages of loss and grief. First is denial. I mean, I couldn't believe that the public officials were so arrogant, that they were so incompetent, they were so self-absorbed. They couldn't even focus on the interest of the people they were supposed to serve, which is the taxpayers. Then it moves on to anger. The reality of their arrogance begins to set in. Then you move on to bargaining. I'm wrapped up in this cause trying to fight my local school board. It's costing me a lot of money. But what did I say? What did I do to deserve this? What could I have done differently to yield a more favorable outcome? Moves on to depression. It's costing me a lot of time, it's costing me a lot of money, my reputation in the community is going down the toilet. Nobody else in town seems to care. Why should I be the only one to fight the local school board for a more open and transparent process so that the taxpayers are aware of all the money they're wasting to fight me when I have a legal right to access my property and a legal right to improve my right-of-way? Finally, I get into acceptance. I accepted the fact that they're arrogant, incompetent. They don't know and they don't care to know that they were violating the right to know law. and they don't want to be held accountable to the taxpayers. But it is loss and grief because you lose confidence in your government, and then you go through such grief trying to hold them accountable and enforce your right to know. So now what? Michelle, I had my trigger moment, okay? I found my liberty passion. So you see, the test is not how you go through that process. I mean, that was my unique process. None of you in this room are going to have that same process. But someday, if you haven't already, you will have an interaction with your government, whether it's local, county, state, and you're not going to be happy with the way it goes. Okay? And you're going to go through those 5 stages of grief. But the key is, what's your call to action when it's all said and done? What purpose does that fight that you just went through and the time and energy and expense that you expended that was unnecessary, what purpose will it serve? Do you give up and walk away? Or do you fight for change?
Fight!
There you go. Carla knows that answer. Well, I chose to fight, and in 2013, I joined up with several other citizens, and we formed the Right to Know New Hampshire, which is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to improving government accountability and your right to know. Now, the foundation for Right to Know is in the New Hampshire Constitution, Part 1, Article 8, which was my predecessor on stage already brought that to your attention, so I won't belabor that point. But he did mention the second part, which says that government should therefore be open, accessible, accountable, and responsive. And to that end, the public's right to know and access to governmental proceedings shall not be unreasonably restricted. See, you have a right to know what your government is doing. And in New Hampshire, it's codified by law in what is known as the Right to Know Law, RSA 91A. It establishes a citizen's right of access to meetings and to governmental records. Openness in the conduct of public business is essential to a democratic society. The purpose is to ensure both the greatest possible public access to the actions, discussions, and records of all public bodies and their accountability to the people. So I took that experience, and when it was all done with my right-of-way and my legal battle, channeled it into something, a force for change that I felt that I could make a positive difference. And so got together with a bunch of people and we formed the Right to Know New Hampshire. We're a nonpartisan organization. What we do, we educate citizens on their right to know. We assist citizens in exercising their right to know. We have people from all over the state contacting us when they run into problems with their local school board, their local planning board, selectmen, because they're not open in the way that they're conducting business. We have a blog which is listed up here. I have cards and a brochure if anybody wants to pick one up. We have the most comprehensive set of information on your right to know in New Hampshire. We're advocates. We propose legislation. Our first year we proposed one bill and it went down in flames because we were new to the process. In recent years we've been getting more than half of our bills passed each year. This year we drafted 9 bills, and we have 9 bills going through the House and the Senate. Last year, Right to Know New Hampshire won the First Amendment Award in New Hampshire. And I currently, as president of Right to Know New Hampshire, sit on the New Hampshire Press Association board. And so we are able to influence to some extent what and help them in right to know issues, because of course the press is very interested in that. So in the time that I have left, and I may not make it through all of this, I'm going to give you just a quick little overview of the Right to Know law so that you can all be aware of it, because as you go out in your adventures, you're going to be interacting with your local government and state government, and it's good to know what your rights are in this regard. You have a right to governmental records, how business is documented, and also when business is transacted, which is access to meetings. And meetings can be either open meetings, which are public meetings, or non-public sessions. You have a right to public records. Matter of fact, one of the bills that we drafted several years ago that got passed now guarantees you the right to inspect a record at no cost. We removed the barrier of governmental agencies causing you to pay money to look at records, because that creates an artificial barrier, and we got that removed. So every person has a right to inspect records at the public office. Certain records are exempt from the disclosure, but those that aren't, you can inspect those records, and no fee can be charged. If you want to exercise your right to look at records, what do? Of course, you have to decide what records you want to inspect. You determine which public body has custody of those records. Does it make any sense to go ask somebody who doesn't have ownership of those records? You submit your request, preferably in writing, and make sure it's reasonably described. Don't ask for everything since the beginning of time. They won't respond, but make sure it's reasonably described. And the public body has 5 days to respond to your request. Public meetings. 4 things are important for a public meeting to be a legal public meeting. It has to have notice. It has to be open to the public. There has to be a quorum present of the members of that public body, and they have to record the minutes. They can go into what's known as a non-public session, but it has to start in a legal public meeting first before they go into that non-public session. There are limitations with what they can do in that non-public session. And the reasons for going into non-public are quite limited. Personnel matters, reputation, as long as it's the reputation of somebody other than a member of the board themselves, acquisition of property, and there's some other ones. And this is all outlined in the law, and if you go to our blog, we have links to the law itself. Meetings that are open to the public has to be open to anyone. Anyone can take notes, and you can record the meeting using your cell phone or any other device. It has to be audible and discernible to the public. So if you're sitting in the room and you can't hear them, ask them to speak up. If they don't want to speak up, go move to the front of the room. If you still can't hear them, go sit in their lap. You have the right to be at that meeting and hear them. And I've had a number of people contact us because they're in a meeting and they can't hear, or the selectman or whatever is whispering to the one next to them. They can't do that. Well, they do that. It's not legal for them. There's no secret ballots. And this is really crucial, because a lot of people trip up on this one. The invitation for the public to speak is not mandatory. So the law ensures public awareness, not public participation. So if you go to a meeting, yes, there are many times where your attendees are allowed to speak, but you don't have a right to speak if they don't allow public input. And this is really important. If there's one thing you leave today from this presentation, I hope you remember this, because this is so important. Because talking about government overreach, public officials are always overstepping their bounds, and many of them do not understand how the law and their authority works in the state of New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, public bodies are political subdivisions of the state. They only have authority if the legislature gives it to them. The legislature provides for the authority in a statute, which is an RSA. Thus, the public body only has authority if a law grants it to them. If a law does not exist, which grants them the authority to take action, then by default, it's interpreted as they don't have the legal authority to do so. So this is really important, because if you're ever talking to an official and they're saying, well, this ordinance or this law or whatever, says that you have to do this, that, and the other thing, you can ask them, well, what law gives you the authority? And if they can't tell you, oh, RSA 67.5 or whatever it reference is, then they may be overreaching because they're trying to do something that the law never gave them the authority to do. A fundamental rule often not understood is that the public body has no authority beyond that exercised by a vote of the public body. So if you're also having an interaction with your local officials and you happen to meet the chairman of the selectmen on the street, and he tells you, you can't do this and you can't do that, or, he has no authority. When he's outside of a meeting that the board has commenced, he has no authority. He's a citizen just like you or I. So it's important, if you're interacting with public officials, that if you're trying to get them to make a decision on your behalf in one way or another, you make sure the board is making the decision, not an individual official who may be on the board, because they individually have no authority, they have no say. When the meeting is called to order, each member is empowered with the right to vote on each issue. When the meeting is adjourned, that power goes away. And so you've got to be very careful about that. So, to wrap up, I would throw out a little plug here and say that if there's one thing that's important for all of you to be aware of, is the right to know law. You'll need it someday. May not be tomorrow, but someday you'll need it. You can go out to our blog and you can learn more about it. Because whether or not you like what your government is doing to you, you have a right to know what it is they're doing to you. Okay? So what's going to be your call to action? Well, some things that you can do. You can engage in government activities. You can attend meetings. I suggest you read the minutes. In whatever town you live in, a lot of times the minutes are online. Go read them and see what they're up to. It only takes a minute or two to read them. You can join our organization. Membership is free. Support future legislation to improve government transparency. Because what we focus on is we recognize that government may not always do what you might think is the right thing to do, and sometimes they do some pretty bad things. We don't focus on what it is they're doing. We focus on making sure that what they do is open and transparent so that you can be informed, and then you can take that knowledge to the voting booth or however else you want to disseminate that knowledge to others. So our focus as an organization is to make sure that government is open and transparent. And that's what we do. So we have a blog. Feel free to go to it and become more educated about right to know. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Just a quick question for you. Is there anything on recording public meetings, like the law? Because place in our town, the minutes weren't accurate for what was said at public meetings. So I can see a recording while public meetings has to be essential.
You can ask them to record it and put it on the local access station if you have something like that. There's no law that says they have to record it. They do have to take minutes, but as you said, a lot of times minutes are not accurate. And that's a problem.
Hi, yeah, I would like to know how, if we can change the law to allow public to be able to speak at these meetings. It's ridiculous that the public can't say things that they want in a public meeting.
The law can always be changed. Right now, though,
It's absurd.
yeah. My feeling is I wouldn't be voting for an official. In my town, I wouldn't vote for anybody. I would pose that question to anybody who was running for office. you know, if you, you know.
My town doesn't have that problem, but I know towns that do.
Yeah, I wouldn't vote for somebody who's not gonna allow public input. Now, usually there's some rules around public input, that might limit it to 3 minutes each or something, because you got a time management issue, but I would definitely not support a vote for somebody who doesn't allow public input. Any other questions?
Sorry, you said that you can only do in a town what there's an RSA to do. Does an RSA say that it is up to the town to decide whether they were going to allow public speaking? Because if there isn't, then which way does it go?
The law is silent on public participation. The right to know law is silent on that point.
Right to know law.
Yeah. Now, there are other laws that might talk to that point. So, for example, if you're in a butter to a property and the planning board's having a meeting on a parcel, you might have a right as an abutter to speak at that meeting, but that's going to be a separate state law that addresses that.
So if you file a right to know request, you say you're talking to you think it's the school board's business, but it turns out it's the planning board or something, and you ask the school board, are they required to tell you that, no, we don't have this information, some other body does, that here it is, or they can just say, sorry, we don't have it, and it's up to you to find out?
That's correct. Yeah, there's a lot of ways that public organizations will not be helpful. That's not against the law in that case, and that's why you have to somehow educate yourself a little bit on the subject matter before you file the request. Know what documents you're looking for, and then find out who has custody of them. The important other thing is the public officials are never required to answer questions with right to know. You have a right to access records, not to get answers to questions. This is another area where people get tripped up because they get upset because the town just spent $100,000 to buy a dump truck. Oh, why did they spend, $100,000 to buy a dump truck? They're not required to answer that question. I mean, you can vote them out of office if you don't like that, but what you can do is ask for all the records relating to the purchase of that dump truck and all the documents that support the decision that was made to buy the dump truck, and find out through those records information that will help you understand why they paid $100,000 for a dump truck.
Thank you for coming, David. We've worked on this quite a bit in the legislature in the time that I've been on Judiciary Committee. And it seems to be, in my mind, a bit of a hodgepodge of amendments that have been made to 91A. Could you talk about the possibility or the advisability of just totally rewriting 91A?
I do think that it could use an overhaul in some areas. I'm not sure how we would go about to pull that off. And so, up to this point, we've been drafting legislation somewhat proactive, but also somewhat reactive, because there's court cases that come down all the time, that there's gray areas in the law, and you think that given the preamble, which says openness is what we're looking for in government, that the officials would be leaning their decision-making towards, I'm going to err on the side of being more open than being less open. But government officials, not all, but some, take the opposite tact, which is, if it's a gray area, let's interpret it in a way that makes it the least open. And so we have court cases that, as a result of that, now remove the gray area, and then we don't like the way that gray area was removed, and we come up with legislation to fill those holes. So it's a little bit of a catch-up, but I do think that there could be, a commission, which in fact there hopefully will be a commission with the ombudsman bill that we currently have in the Senate, SB 555. In New Hampshire, we got a very poor rating for, there was a 50 state review of sort of right-to-know laws across the country, and we've got a poor rating in the area of the resolving of complaints, because in the state of New Hampshire, if a citizen has a complaint about the right-to-know law, there's nobody in government that they can go complain to. They have to go file a petition in court and take the public body to court. And so that's very onerous on the individual to do so, especially when many times the issue is really in the public's interest, not the individual's interest. So if I have to take them to court, I got to spend $260 to file in court a petition, when in reality it's affecting all citizens. So we have a bill that is going through the legislature this year, SB 555, which is going to establish an ombudsman, which will allow people to file complaints and have an independent arbiter review those complaints. But also with that bill is an appeals commission, and that appeals commission is going to be recommending legislative changes. So one of the things that they could recommend is a more comprehensive review of the right-to-know law once they see all the problems in it. Yes.
Yeah, hi. You're teaching me something here. I think Carla Gericke had submitted her name to become part of the Right to Know Commission of some kind, and I don't think she got picked up for it, but it sounded to me like there may be some sort of group of Right to Know committee members or commission members or something that already exists. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I was one of 13 members that served on the study commission over this fall. That was the result of a bill last year. And we established a study commission, and the result of that study commission, which is now wrapped up, the result of that was a report which I drafted. And again, if you go to our blog, you can all this information is there. But the end result of that was this SB 555, the ombudsman bill, which is going to establish an ombudsman if it passes.
All right, last question.
Do you think that we have the right to know the voter list and the business or corporation list as recorded by the state of New Hampshire?
Personally, I definitely think so. As far as the law, I'm not sure. I think the voter list is accessible.
The law is that the PACs and the parties can buy it for money, and that means it's not accessible to the voters, to taxpayers. So the big organizations buy it. It's like $10,000 for a list of each election, say, and also about $10,000 for the list of corporations. But obviously, we cannot do that as individuals.
Okay, that's an area I'm not familiar with, because that's more tied into election law. I thought you may not be able to buy it, but I thought you could view it by going to your local town and asking to look at the voter list as a government record. But again, there are some exemptions that are detailed in other laws that do exclude certain documents from the right to know law. So I'm not 100% sure now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.